Good morning, everyone, or depending where you're at in the world, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. My name is Cliff Prasad, and I'd like to take a moment to welcome you to this webinar where we're going to talk a little bit about how AI can play a role in your content strategy. So, like I said, my name is Cliff Prasad. I am the Director of Strategy and Creative Services here at Canopy Studios. And my role is to oversee a team of strategists and designers where we create synthesis between user need, organizational goals, and beautiful functional designs. So, like I mentioned today, we're going to talk a little bit about how AI can play a role in your content strategy. And I want to go over a brief agenda of how we're going to do this. I want to talk a little bit about the real world impact of AI and how it's going to actually affect your organization moving forwards. I want to go through a couple of case studies that talk about how other organizations have achieved success using AI. Then we'll talk about how you can leverage AI or how we've been leveraging AI at Canopy Studios to actually deliver success for some of our clients. One of a large part of content strategy is also positioning your content for AI search. That's a new thing that's emerging for a lot of organizations. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how you can position your content and rework your content strategy so that it's optimized for artificial intelligence search. And then we'll wind up at about 20 to 25 after the hour. And I'd love to answer any questions that you've got at this point in time. So without further ado, let's jump into it, shall we? So, how can AI help organizations such as yours? If you're in the nonprofit, mission driven, higher education, or healthcare space, or any other industry, AI can help you move beyond just drafting copy. A lot of what we see organizations using AI for is sort of a multiplier in the copy creation realm, but AI can do so much more. It can amplify your mission with smarter content. It can work faster without sacrificing quality. And really, where we find the benefits of using AI at Canopy is it really frees up our humans to actually do that higher level thinking. We get AI to do a lot of the grunt work for us, and then we come in with our human eye and we actually take AI to the next level. And so a lot of this work that we leverage AI for is not necessarily meant for content creation, although we do use it for some of that. What we're really using it for is doing sort of the labor intensive things that don't have a lot of impact in the final work. And that frees up our team to do a lot of the higher level thinking that we need it to do. Now, all teams are under pressure to communicate more, prove impact, and serve broader audiences with less resources. And given the current climate out there, I think AI helps remove bottlenecks so that you and your team can focus on meaningful engagement. What that means is you're being asked to do more with fewer resources, and AI can be a force multiplier for your mission. Meeting your audience where they live is also something that can be a very labor intensive exercise because it requires processing a lot of data, understanding your audience, and then synthesizing outputs that actually resonate with them. So making AI part of your workflow is not something that is intended to replace folks. It's intended to make lives easier, but also improve the quality of work that you produce for your audiences. So I wanted to start off by going over a couple of case studies and examining some real world successes where AI has been leveraged to create large impact for organizations. But before we do that, I want to go through some stats that I thought was really interesting. When I was doing research for this particular webinar, I came across some really interesting stats about AI adoption. And one of the things that's really important to know is that AI has been around for a lot longer than you think, but it's now just coming to the forefront as something that's really leveraging or moving the needle for a lot of organizations, especially those that don't have a lot of resources. So traditionally, nonprofits or mission driven clients, they have to do more with less. And what we're finding is that about 78 to 80% of nonprofits are now using some form of AI. Now, they're using it in a way that might not be what we consider to be the optimum ways. They're using it for content generation and communication mostly. But you can see that AI adoption in the past year has just skyrocketed for nonprofits. Higher education institutions are also adopting AI. We see that 75% of higher education institutions have included AI as part of their 2025 strategic plan. And we see that coming on board because one of the things that higher education institutions have is a plethora of data that they have to process. And then, of course, healthcare organizations. Healthcare have a lot more stricter sort of controls around AI. But what we're seeing is that 43 out of 67 healthcare organizations that were surveyed are deploying AI in some form across their entire organization to speed up their response to actual patients. And so what this means is AI can span the gamut, whether you're working in a small organization with limited budgets or you're working with really, larger healthcare organizations, which in some case may have limited budgets. Um, you can leverage AI as a force multiplier. You can use it to actually improve your workflow and get things moving a lot faster for you. So what I'd like to do now is showcase some of the success stories of where organizations have leveraged AI. And I want to start off by talking about the American Cancer Society. One of the challenges that they were facing was a lot of the study data that they had and a lot of the patient data that they had was requiring manual processing. So what that meant was lengthy processing time for study results. It meant that there was a larger margin for error because human processing was really, human processing. And sometimes people make mistakes. And so this was being done manually. And the problem with that is errors and lengthy processing, and a lot of resources were required to do this. So what they did was they started leveraging AI and large language models to process thousands of medical charts that were anonymized for their clients and studies. And the result was a dramatic reduction in research time and study efficiency. So what they got was more accurate data, and it took them less time to actually process that data. What it meant was they could formulate hypotheses and test those hypotheses much earlier than they would previously. In the sort of mission driven space, the World Food Program, one of the problems that they were facing was how do they allocate resources and disaster relief efforts when something is so urgent? One of the other things they were finding, and sadly, was when there was disaster relief aid required and they were required to purchase things for disaster relief aid, they found a bit of price gouging was happening. People were inflating their prices in disaster regions. And so they had some trouble with figuring out where their dollar would actually provide the most impact, but also purchasing relief aid that could then be delivered to the right place at the right time to service the most need. So what they did was they started leveraging two specific AI models. They used a program called Sky and Scout. And Sky helped them figure out where the need was greatest, and Scout helped them find where they could actually source resources for the best possible pricing. And what that meant was during the Turkey Syria earthquakes of 2023 and the floods in Pakistan in 2024, they found that they were able to deliver disaster relief 13 times faster than they normally would. And they did it at 77% cheaper. And so what this meant was AI was creating a real world impact and saving lives based on how it actually leverage large swaths of data, but also aggregate data from different sources to find the best possible pricing for the World Food Program. And then last but not least, I want to talk about Georgia State University. If you're in a higher education institution, you probably have heard the term summer melt. For those of you that don't know, summer melt is basically about 10 to 20% of high school seniors who apply to an institution and get accepted never make it to their first day of class. They either miss a deadline or forget about something, or they get poached by other higher education institutions. And Georgia State University did something that was really interesting. What they did was they used AI to leverage student applications and merge that with timelines for actual deadlines. And what they did was they proactively reached out to students when deadlines were approaching. They created custom text messages that could actually create information to remind students that they need to submit something on a deadline, that they've missed the deadline, and they need to catch a secondary deadline. And what this meant was there was a 3.3% increase in students who applied and students who actually showed up in their first day for class. So what that meant was that summer melt, 3.3% might not seem like that much, but when you're servicing tens of thousands of students, that really moves the needle across the board. And so these were some of the areas that what you're noticing is that, or what I hope you're noticing, is that AI is being leveraged for much more than just content creation. It's really about taking and managing large sets of data and extracting insights from that data. And I want to talk about some of the ways that you can do this as well. One of the things that's really important is that whether you're working in a large organization with lots of resources or whether you're working in a small organization as well, one of the things that AI can actually do is bring that multiplier effort to your organization. So, what I'm going to talk about is how we actually use AI at Canopy. And one of the things that we know is that, especially if you're working in that mission driven space, higher ed or healthcare, trust is everything. Maintaining trust with your audiences is something that's really important. And what we find is outdated information is one of the greatest ways that organizations break trust with their audiences. But we also know that keeping information up to date and making sure it's relevant to users up to the minute can be a really challenging and resource intensive effort. So here's how we use this. And as I get into this, I'm going to be mentioning some tooling and some platforms that we use. At the end of this presentation, I've got an appendix with links to all of these tools. So you don't need to frantically take notes or write this down as we go. But one of the things that we do to help prioritize where we're going to update content and really maintain content for our clients is we'll use a platform called Screaming Frog to run reports. And what that report will do is it will help us identify information of content on our website. Then we take that information and we feed it into ChatGPT. And what we ask ChatGPT to do is classify the content as high impact, low impact, or outdated. The beauty of doing this is the results that we get out of this is we're able to identify outdated or redundant pages. And we find that this is quite prevalent in organizations that have a lot of legacy data, like hospitals or other healthcare institutions. We ask ChatGPT to prioritize updates that matter the most. And this helps us protect that trust that users have in us. What it means is we ask ChatGPT, and I provided a sample prompt that we use here to classify each page in our content journey as high, medium, or low priority based on traffic. We'll ask it to determine whether that content is fresh and aligned with the mission. And then we'll ask it to list 5 content updates that would deliver the most impact what required the least amount of resources. The beauty of this is it allows us to prioritize our efforts. We're not sort of updating pages that users aren't visiting or resonating with them. We're actually taking the most high impact pages and going through that prioritization list to make sure that we're creating content that is updated, relevant, and builds trust with our users. The next area that we use this is what we find is a lot of mission driven organizations collect huge amounts of data, surveys, CRM data, town halls. But one of the things that's really interesting for us to see is that a lot of these data pieces live in silos. And we find that a lot of organizations struggle to translate this data into actionable insights. So what we started doing with some of our clients is taking those data sources like user surveys, CRM data, or content audit, and their user personas, and we feed it into an AI model like Claude. Now, the AI model that you use here can be Claude, it can be ChatGPT. One of the things that we find, the main difference between something like Claude and ChatGPT is ChatGPT is really great at aggregating large sets of data, but the outputs are not necessarily the most human readable. What we find is Claude is really good at doing large amounts of data. It's not great with like image data or data that lives in different formats other than plain text. But what it's really great at doing is the outputs of that are really human readable. So we use Claude for like our large data sets that are mostly text based. And what we do is we ask Claude to validate the content for relevancy based on user needs. What we get out of this is we're able to identify content gaps, areas where we're not actually speaking to users, but they actually have a need, identify the community needs, see if there's a tone and voice mismatch, and it allows us to validate our user personas. So we'll feed Claude something and we'll ask it to validate the data set, cluster those responses into themes, identify common pain points, and really sort of jump into user motivations and questions. And what this does is it really gives us a plan for where we should be remediating content. And we have a framework that we use at Canopy called the KFC framework, which is keep, fix, create. What content do we want to keep as is? What content do we need to remediate? And what content is missing that we need to actually build from scratch to resonate with users? Now, one of the things that we really love doing here at Canopy is this. We like to actually feed Claude data and we remove user personas from the actual data. And what this does is we then ask Claude to formulate personas for us. What that does is it does two things. One, it identifies whether there's a mismatch between our existing personas and our audience. But what we found, what was really valuable for us, was by doing this, Claude was able to identify user personas that we hadn't considered. A good example of this was we did some work for the Alameda County Food Bank. And one of the things that we discovered was there were two personas that their content was not speaking to, specifically active military members who were between deployments and college students as well. And so identifying missing personas is a really great way for you to realign your content strategy to speak to audiences that are resonating with your content, but not necessarily getting the information that they need right off the bat. And then the next thing is repurposing content at scale. We see this quite often in healthcare organizations. They've got large amounts of content like annual reports, long form research content, evaluation studies. And all of this information kind of goes to an internal audience and then sits there. It doesn't really become something that's performative for the organization. So what we've started doing is taking a lot of that long form internal content that they've got and feeding it into AI engines like Jasper and Canva and asking it to actually generate new content based on the data that we've got. So we'll ask it to take a large report, split it into sections, summarize each section, and then suggest sort of blog post, email, and social posts that we can actually use. And one of the things that's really important for us to do is we'll then ask the AI engines to formulate, let's say, a 6-week or an 8-week content plan and suggest posting cadence as well too. So what that allows us to do is take something that already exists, repurpose that large amount of data, and split it up into something that can be publicly consumable via your marketing channels if you so need. And we can even go as far in using Canva to actually generate assets for those particular platforms. We always like to use humans to create creative assets, but we know that organizations that have less budget may not have those resources on scale as well too. Now, the last part where Canopy leverages AI is probably one of my favorites, which is we use it for competitive and peer and in-market analysis. What we'll do is this is usually a two-step process. We'll start off by actually crawling competitor websites using something like SEMrush, and then we'll take those insights and feed it into an AI platform like Claude. But once again, you can use ChatGPT for this if this is your preferred platform. And then we ask the AI engine to cluster that content into themes, highlight common topics, and evaluate tone and audience focus. What this means is we get a clear idea of where our competitors' focus lies, but it also allows us to surface opportunities of where we can position ourselves uniquely for our clients as well. So we ask it to highlight common topics, tone, and audience focus. And then the second part of this process is we take our own clients' data, our sitemap, their top content, their personas, and we feed it into that data set as well. And then what we ask the AI engines to do is compare these two sets of content. We want to identify gaps in our content that our competitors are filling, and vice versa. One, we want to identify gaps in our competitors' content that we can actually fill. We want to surface opportunities to differentiate our tone, structure, and format. And we want to rank the gaps by audience value. What that means is we also are able to create a prioritization list of what we should tackle first that will bring the most impact for our clients. And so we ask it to compare two sets of content, identify gaps, and then provide a prioritization list based on audience data so that we can develop and deliver efforts. And this has proved really valuable in our support tier of work that we do here at Canopy, which allows us to leverage ongoing continuous website improvement over a longer period of time. And so these are some of the ways that I feel that even if you're in a small organization or a large organization, you can leverage AI for your content strategy to create that large insights of data and then prioritization reports on how you develop efforts to drive the most impact for your organization. Now, the other aspect of working with AI and content strategy is something that I think everyone here is keenly aware of. AI search is becoming something that is relatively important for organizations across the board. If anyone on this call has actually been monitoring their search engine optimization or their search engine efforts over the last, I want to say, 6 months, you've probably seen a little bit of a dip in that because AI has become a really primary source for search engine optimization. And so, what I'd like to do as the last part of our time here together is talk about some of the things that will affect your content strategy and how you can prime your content to be most effective within AI search. And the first thing we need to talk about is how we shift our focus. We need to shift our focus away from traditional SEO, which primarily focuses on links and link quality and backlinking. And we need to start focusing our efforts on what I like to call, or what experts like to call, answer engine optimization, which is moving away from SEO to AEO, which focuses on providing answers to real world user questions. And so, what that means is for folks that are responsible for content strategy and managing content, you need to write content that feels conversational. This is especially challenging, I know, for healthcare and higher education organizations, which are really traditionally focused on formalized content presentation. But content that fails to reflect natural, everyday language that your users use doesn't rank well in AEO or artificial search intelligence. So one of the things is you start to repurpose your content strategy to be a bit more conversational as well. And so the other thing is segmenting content for easy retrieval, breaking content into easily manageable chunks, usually between 30 to 50 words, each addressing a single question, using things like lists and bulleted lists to direct answers really quickly, we find is actually really, really beneficial for providing search. And one of the things that we find is posing what we find is most users are posing questions to artificial intelligence search engines, and writing your content in that QA format is going to be really important for your users as well. Now, the next one, I'm going to get a little bit nerdy here, but integrating structured data formats is really going to be important for positioning your content. Using things like how-tos or FAQs, we find to be really, really great for positioning your content optimally for artificial search engines. One of the areas that we see a bit of a gap is, and I'm going to get a little bit nerdy here, is in using generative engine optimization schemas. Now, what that means is a really nerdy term for providing a little bit of coding content that describes your content to artificial engine search engines or generative search results. And what we find is if your website is coded to a high standard and you've got a fairly updated website, this should be invisible. This should be generated automatically. Where we find this problematic is for websites that have been around for a while and they haven't generated the coded outputs that are required to optimize their content for a generative search. And so things like schemas. And if you don't know what a schema is, it's just basically a little bit of code that you include on your website that describes the content of your page to a search engine or an artificial intelligence engine. And so if you're worried about this, there is a great tool that I've included in the appendix, which is called the online schema generator, where you actually plug in human content. And what it does is it generates a little bit of code that you can then include on your web pages that describes and optimizes that content for generative search, and it helps with your SEO as well. Now, like I said, if your content is actually well formatted and you've got great underlying code, this should be generated for you automatically. But one of the cool things that I also wanted to show you, and I've included this in the appendix as well too, is this great test that allows you to test your actual web pages on whether they register well in generative search results. So you can plug in a URL here and it'll tell you how well your web page performs. And I've included this in the generative search result and the appendix for this this talk as well too. So you'll have that as a resource that you can leverage. The other thing that you can do for your content strategy is build authority. building trust and authority with search engines is going to be something that's going to be really important. So demonstrating, using this term EAT, which is demonstrating expertise, experience, authoritiveness, and trustworthiness in your content, is going to be really important. And this is a lens that we use when we're evaluating and auditing client content. We use this formula to actually help us figure out whether we can position content ideally for artificial search. This is one that requires some resourcing, and using some of the techniques that I've talked about previously, this can be a great way for you to actually make sure that your content actually shows up in generative search, which is refreshing your content on a quarterly basis. What I recommend for our clients to do, or what we do for some of our clients on our support tier, is revisit their high impact pages. We update data, we re-answer FAQs, we refine headers, and we reapply that schema that I just showed you for continued AI visibility. Just like SEO is an ongoing process, optimizing your content strategy and optimizing your actual content on your webpage is something that's really important to ensure that you continue to show up in those generative search results. And last but not least, it's really important to understand risk governance. We always make sure that human beings are part of the critical review process for anything that we've generated via AI. Because we know AI can introduce falsehoods, it can misinterpret sources, it can perpetuate biases if left unchecked, and of course, it can hallucinate. So one of the things that we always do is we make sure that there is a human being that is reviewing the outputs from AI, reviewing the inputs from AI, and when it comes to generating the actual content or actually taking those insights and moving them into action, we make sure that human beings are critical, an integral part of that process, and they lead the way as well. So to recap, the three things that I want you to take away from this particular talk today is use AI to unlock insights from complex data. AI is really great at formulating and taking large swaths of data and really formulating insights from it. Make your content shorter and more conversation. Try to respond and use that QA format of question and answer within your content to help position your content better in AI search. And of course, we want you to let people assist, let AI assist, but have people integrated into the decision-making process so that you're not just taking your AI insights and pushing them out to your audience. And if you can take those three things away, the one thing that I want you to take away from this is start small. Pick one workflow like an audit or a content repurposing project, and then expand thoughtfully from there. Hopefully, I've given you some things to think about, some ways that you can actually leverage AI to uplift your content strategy. And I want to say, as we're closing in on time, thank you for your time and attention today. It's been a pleasure talking to you a little bit about AI. My name is Cliff Prasad. If you'd like to connect with me, you can find me online on LinkedIn. And because before I open it to questions, I always like to end my presentations with a positive note. Here's a picture of a cat. So I haven't been paying attention to questions in the chat, but if you folks have any questions that I've missed, I would love to be able to answer any questions that you've got. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat. So I see there's a couple. Do you compare? So Blanca, thank you for the question. Do you compare the content by entering the two websites into ChatGPT? So this is a great question because once again, it deals with that volume of data. What we do is we use Screaming Frog to generate sort of the top pages and the top pages of content from our competitors. And then we feed that Screaming Frog report into ChatGPT. So we're not actually doing the pulling in of content. We're using something like Screaming Frog or SEMrush to pull that content for us. And then we're taking those reports and feeding it into our AI models. So it's not just about us doing the sort of heavy lift of auditing our competitors' content. We're using platforms to do that as well. And SEMrush is a really great tool because it has an AI functionality that will help you do that as well. And I see Blanca's typing again. And if anyone else has any questions as well, please feel free to type that out as well. Shani asked a question, will we have access to this recording and the deck presented? You will absolutely have that. We will have a couple of follow-up emails that will follow on with this. And one of the things that is in this deck that you don't see right now is we've got some reference links for some of the research that I use to sort of validate some of the content that I put inside of this deck as well. And I've got links to all of the tools. And we also provided you with an AI content preparedness checklist that you can download and take away and sort of apply as a framework to start this content process as well. There are a couple of other platforms than Screaming Frog. You can use Jasper. You can use SEMrush, SEMrush. I'll type that in the chat. And one of the things that I didn't mention here, but I included in the resources, was a platform called Crayon, which is really great that if you don't have the resources to formulate those insights, if you don't have folks on staff who are strategists that really are able to formulate those insights, we would love for you to connect with Canopy because we've got humans that are able to formulate much deeper insights than any AI platform. But if you have a resource like Crayon, Crayon is a platform that will help take all of that AI data and help you formulate some insights out of that as well too. So those are all great platforms, and we'll share this deck with you. We are a little bit past time, so I do want to say thank you for your time and attention today. If you have additional questions, connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to be able to answer them. Connect with Canopy. We'll be sending the deck around later today. Blanca asked a really great question. I'm going to answer this question before we close out, which is, do you think basic GPT is enough? It depends. If you are looking at your own data, then yes, basic GPT is enough. It might be a little bit more resource intensive. What we find is even going up a little bit into the paid tiers of ChatGPT does get you a lot more insights. But if you're a smaller organization with lots of data, basic GPT can get you there. It just requires a little bit more human work. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. Please feel free to connect with us on our social channels, and we would love to continue the conversation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully I will see you online or in future Canopy webinars as well.